We've covered so much today, a huge spectrum of issues and agenda items for the build-to-rent sector. And we're going to go through another one now. Unfortunately, one of the party, Chris from the RG Group, our contractor representative, is not going to be able to be with us, but we will compensate with our collective experience. Now, I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Damien from Hub, who are specialist build-to-rent developers. We have, I have to check I get the name of your company.
Martina, I designer at heart.
An interior designer who has to go across the full spectrum of what the development process is. And of course, Tom from Roundhill Capital, who heavily invested in the build-to-rent space and the operating space and asset management and development and everything else. This is actually the third installment of a three-part series that Tom and I developed. I can't remember exactly how it came about, but looking at how we need to align investment expectations, aspirations, etc., with development, with the developer, and then ultimately with the contractor to get an optimal product. And whilst there's some great work in this space, there's always room for improvement. And what we wanted to culminate in this session was looking at what the solutions might be. We covered some of the risks beforehand, and we'll look at what the future might look like a little bit more in this session. Damien, would you give us a quick recap on what we covered before?
Yeah, of course, Brendan. I think we, in the last two sessions, spoke about risk and where risk's best placed between investor, contractor, and developer. And I guess some of the conclusions we came to in our last webinar was this idea of honesty, transparency, and collaboration, which is absolutely key. It sounds obvious, but it doesn't always happen. We spoke about the importance of investing in the development journey earlier to manage risk. And what I meant by that was in that planning journey, quite often is an obsession with developers trying to get planning consent for as little money as possible. That we strongly believe that's a flawed approach. That investment up front, whether that's in ground conditions, rights allied, all those risky matters that we end up drafting multiple legal documents for, dealing with that at early stages and investing in it's very important. We believe in continuing to run a risk register. And I think we all concluded that the importance of closing as many risks as possible as we go along, but there always will be risks, having them identified, having them on the table, and placing them what the party is best placed to manage them. And what we mean by that, some risks are, in our opinion, certainly developer opinion, the contractor risks, and they should be placed there. They're best placed to deal with it. But being open and honest and having a risk register with everything on the table and agreeing between funder, developer, and contractor who's best to take it. I think that's where we stopped off, broadly speaking, last time.
Yes, but we spoke quite positively about this process, and I think to some extent it's been, you've kind of maybe not pioneered this, but you've certainly been a great example of the execution of this idea of like, put everything on the table and let's not leave the table until it's allocated. Yeah. And it sounds simple, but I think probably would be a good idea just as we look at this recap, because we'll come on to managing risk going forward in a moment. But can we just talk about a couple of examples of where tricky risk was unpacked and properly allocated in all your experiences? But if you just give us a few examples from your side, Damien.
Yeah, we've done, it'll soon be 14 forward funding BTR deals over the last 9 years, and the two big events I always talk about is COVID risk and in the Building Safety Act. Immediately after or during COVID, trying to negotiate deals at that point and who's taking that time risk. And, there's many iterations and many lawyers involved with many opinions. But the conclusion we came to, a risk like that's a major risk, should be a shared risk. It shouldn't sit with one party, and the deal we were negotiating at the time, that was a shared risk. The Building Safety Act, it's obviously clear-ish the way forward now, but for the last 24 months, we've been negotiating DFAs that had to draft for every scenario that might happen under the moon. In our last DFA, I think we had close to 80 pages of drafting at one point on the Building Safety Act. Again, that wasn't really our approach to dealing with it. We would rather work through the scenarios. And again, it was another example where, and actually the examples what Chris, unfortunately he's not here today at RG Construction, and Railstar, and between the three parties, we apportioned aligned risk, and again, after many meetings, it became a shared risk. And quite often, shared risk is a good thing. And what I mean by shared risk, there's obviously cost and time. And those shared risks and alignment of interest, I think, are really important. And that proves to be fruitful for us all. Trying to pass risk where it's not appropriate and hide things and bury it in a set of ERs, and a contractor signs a document, is a very short-sighted view, and ultimately will come back to bite you at some point.
I mean, one of the interesting things for me in that conversation was, under the design and build contracts, and maybe the culture of the sales world is like sort of trying to offset risk as best you can, and a build to rent, doesn't really work as well. So if I bring Tom in now, from an investor perspective, obviously you've got to do what you've got to look at things from a very different perspective. So how are you looking at risk now? How do you view this dynamic?
So we're investors, operators, and we're sort of long-term holders. So we need to understand the specification that we want from day one and have quite a clear project and design brief. And I think it's, a lot of the deals we do are sort of forward funds, and we expect a lot of the development and delivery risks to be passed on to the developer and then the contractor. I think it's just establishing what those risks look like and sort of sit in a box as Damien's sort of outlined, but we can help through that process. And last couple of years, you've had to work through a number of issues. High inflation and Building Safety Act, we've added second stair cores to assets, and you have to sort of collectively work through those problems. But from our side, from the sort of funder operator, you need to know what you want to build from day one and have a sort of clear specification and sort of design guide.
So, on one level, the investors are saying, look, we're not about development risk and construction, that's your baby. But what is happening in build to rent certainly is that the investment world, or the money, is becoming increasingly clear on what they want to see at the end, both in terms of the type of product or the nature of the product and its performance in the longer term. And I think that's a new dynamic, I guess. In some respects, I might have been in PBSA now for a while, or in hospitality, but in residential real estate, that's a fairly new dynamic, and it's influencing the entire process. And so, whilst I suppose in a sense, once your client is, the clearer your client is on what he wants, the easier it is to give that to him in a very simplistic sense. But Martina, you are the designer here, and you have to jump between the investment brief as it might come along, work with the developer who's obviously going to have a different take on certain things, and then the contractor is going to have another take altogether again, and the operator ultimately will have some influence too. How do you approach this? How do you bridge these gaps or manage this process?
Yes, so with my company we focus on the interior design part, and so we're just one little part of the whole machine. But obviously we wear different hats, because from a development point of view, we need to make sure that things are on budget and they will be delivered on time. There is operations to consider for the longevity of the product, and making sure that the staff can operate the building properly. There is branding to consider and the vibe that the building has to convey. And then obviously the coordination with the architects and the other consultants to make it happen. So the way I like to see this is that we're really one part of a bigger machine, and so we have to coordinate with everyone. And it works really well when we are appointed from the beginning until the very end, so that we can be part of the conversation through how the whole cycle of the development, basically, because there are so many things that get discussed.
So I just want to probe one part of what you said. So there's some interesting stats, I can't remember where they came from, but we live in buildings for 90% of our life, and we live in our own homes for 60% of that time. So our home environment is really, really important. As an architect, my own view is that the role of interior design is highly undernourished. But in build to rent, the source of revenue is the customer. Yeah. And the better the customer experience, the more likely is they're going to stay, and that revenue is more secure. So to some extent, a good customer experience is a revenue risk mitigation process. The dynamics of getting to a point where we can rely on that rental income, for developers and contractors, success is getting the job done on time, on budget, and within the margins that are agreed or set. The longevity of that longevity of the product, or the how it operates is an important function of the process, of the dynamic. But to some extent, you've got different pressures. You've got, and it's a shame Chris is not here, to talk about that. That success is a programmatic success and a cost success as much as anything. So perhaps this is one for Tom. Should we be working backwards now? Should we be working backwards from the customer back up to the investor piece rather than a bottom-up approach, or is it a top-down, or in reality, is it both? What's your sense?
It's a little bit of both, and for us, it's a consistent and constant feedback loop, but we're all aligned to create the best quality product we can. It doesn't necessarily have to be the top 1% and the most expensive, just suitable to the market, and different operators, different investors will want a different product, and it could be an affordable product, but it can still be a very high quality version of that product. And so that's the brief that we would start with. It will be designed to a budget, and Martina will do the best job she can to, let's say, an affordable budget as opposed to a top end, and then Damien will build it. So as long as that brief is clear from day one, we all know what we're getting. If we then upscale that to the shell's the same, but we're going for the top 1%, that's fine. We know that from day one, and then the budget's different. Martina has a bigger budget, Damien has a bigger budget, and that tenant is different. So I think it's just knowing where you want to get to from day one.
So that clarity, the evolution of the brief, is the clarity of not just the market you're trying to target, but what's going to really work in that market.
Yep.
Damien, from your perspective, I've watched the evolution of Hub, if you like, in a lot of sense, as through this build-to-rent space. How have you seen the market changing since, say, the first build-to-rent buildings that you've done? And what would you like to see from the likes of Tom, I dare say from the likes of your architects and interior designers? What would make your life easier?
Yeah, I guess answering the first question, we did, I think, one of the first institutionally forward-funded deals in 2013 in the UK. And, it's come a huge way, like from Tom and other investors. Like, the brief then was minimal. That's no fault to anyone. We were all learning, including ourselves. We very much say we're in third generation BTR now in the Hub business. I think we are here in the UK, and we'll soon be going on the fourth generation with a greater emphasis on social and environmental impact. So I think the emphasis on quality has changed, and the emphasis on social and environmental impact. 2013-14, there was obsession. What was the price? Now, funders, before they want to know about price, does it have 2 stairs? Does it comply with the Building Safety Act? And do you genuinely care about ESG? I think that's brilliant, because they're putting an emphasis on quality and positive impact. So the sector is moving in the right direction, and I do believe investors are now willing to pay for that, which means us as developers have a responsibility to keep upping our game and improving quality, and not having an idea, I will place the cheapest possible M&E in this building, because come 2 years post-PC, as developer, I'm out. Now it's changed. When we do DD with investors, it's a collaborative process, and they're willing to pay more for better M&E, fabric-first approach. So the sector is going in the right direction. I guess we don't want this blip we have at the moment, which hopefully it is a blip, but high inflation and cost of debt and all the issues everyone knows about as an excuse to go backwards, because that's the temptation. How do you take £15 a square foot off that building? We just have to be careful. And us as developers, designers and investors, we don't slide backwards, and we keep improving and get to that fourth generation of BTR.
I mean, I agree that we're going very much in the right direction, but I think to coin a phrase, or I hope I'm going to quote you correctly, Tom, how much in, I'll put this much in, but what's the value out? That equation of, okay, fine, I'll pay a little bit more, well, what's the value back to me? That dynamic, that simple equation that's often very complex, but it's a very simple way of articulating how we need to bring that value proposition forward. And again, so going to you, Martin, from a designer perspective, I mean, to some extent, Tom might come along and say, "Oh, I want, this is the market," and so on and so forth. But you've got to translate that into a specification, into a layout, into a livable solution that's also buildable. I know you'll be working with architects and that kind of stuff as well, but it's about its deliverability. Mm-hmm. How do you contribute to this collaboration and risk mitigation through the work that you do?
I think one very important point, especially at the beginning, and we go back to the brief basically, it's to establish priorities, because we cannot have it all, and every project is different, and as Tom was saying, every developer might want different things. So, for example, if the priority is budget or sustainability, then it changes the way we approach the project, right? So if the priority is sustainability, it means the developer can invest a bit more, and maybe they will hold on the building for a longer time, and that's one type of project. If they want more affordable, we might design, I'll just give an example, in communal areas, we wouldn't put many bookcases or shelving units because those require more accessories in the end, and the budget for accessories is often overlooked until the end. So it's just designing in a smart way to accommodate what we perceive to be the main priority for the developer, and this has to be discussed in detail at the beginning, but then also communicating these with every party. So we have regular meetings, and communication is key in this sense. We also are very good at collaborating remotely, but having done that for 5 years, even before COVID, we are also very aware that some things cannot be coordinated remotely, right? So it's also very important to strike that balance between site visits, in person, and remote coordination. And another point that I think is important is using technology as well. And so working in BIM, for example, because if there is a ventilation unit that is clashing with a pendant, and you find out on site when it's built, what can you do? You just live with it, right? If you find out months before on a screen, then it's a different conversation that you can have. I know this is not very easy because Revit is not a software that is built for interior designers, but it can be done. Like in my team, we have spent quite a lot of resources in the last 2 years to switch to BIM, and we're quite happy with the result now. So yeah, those are just...
I mean, the technology piece, I think, is really, really important, and I think that what's interesting, particularly with BIM, is the pickup of BIM with contractors, and with some developers as well. Really what they're talking to is the digitization of construction or the development process. Now, a statutory obligation through the Building Safety Act, at least to record how the safety plans are administered and managed. But this digitization of the process is so important and has got to be a big part of our future. Tom and I were on a panel earlier on the carbon and financial risk session earlier with the BRE and Ruckus, and it was quite interesting. It's really about data, collecting that data, analyzing it effectively, and then using that for a continuous improvement loop. So some of you may have seen the AI session as well, which really, quite interestingly, the traditional approach to development, certainly from a design perspective, as you start very general and probably not very efficient, and you move towards efficiency through iterative processes and that. What AI is going to do is get you to uber efficiency at the beginning, and then you work out perhaps to beauty or to placemaking. And there's an inversion which is going to occur. And if I was in big-time architecture, which I'm not anymore, I would be getting that software in the office very, very quickly. Because that's, I think, a part of the solution and the going forward to it. And we do want to turn our attention now to the future. We've seen technology coming in. We've seen collaboration coming in. We've seen some really healthy discussions around how risk is put on the table, moved around, and then apportionately allocated. All of these are really positive dynamics, and it's echoed with our discussion with house builders. This is not, this is in a sense, you're more urban built to rent. I know you've got other strings to your bow as well, and retrofit being part of that. But this idea of risk sharing as a part of a solution, or risk sharing differently to the way perhaps we've done it historically, is really, really important, and part of I think the innovation that build to rent is bringing as we move forward. So how do we see the future? I mean, again, Tom, you're the money guy, and you're going to operate these things, and then I always have the view that money gets what money wants. What do you want? How do you want to see the industry evolve?
Ultimately, we want to be forward-thinking, efficient. We want our tenants, customers, people, students to be happy, and it's how can we continue to learn from what we're doing, learn from what we're seeing, sharing of data between other developers and contractors, incorporating the right technology, and sort of benchmarking the right product in the right locations. So I think it's always an iterative process, and that's that constant feedback loop, which I think we gain from having the operator in-house that can then inform our asset management guys that then speak to the investment people, and the development team then have a clearer specification for the next project. But it can also be relevant for retrofitting existing assets, but it's how can we be better, smarter, more efficient, more sustainable going forward. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve, good quality homes that we can be proud of.
What do you see in the future, Martina?
I think there will be a lot more collaboration between different players. Like, what I really like of this kind of project is that many consultants come together, and they are really willing to share and collaborate, and this collaboration is what really brings value then to the project. So if we can do more of that, everybody specializing in its niche, I think this is where we can find a good solution.
And this collaboration thing is just coming through all the time, and collaboration is really about relationship. Now, in one of the previous sessions in the build-up to this one, we talked about changing relationships, but positive changing relationships, Damien, in the sense that, and if Chris was here, perhaps we'll have to talk for Chris, but we spoke a little bit about going to less subcontractors, looking at a smaller pool, but a pool that's trustworthy, buying value and peace of mind rather than always on price. How, you're having to manage multiple mini contracts in a sense through that construction process. How is that shifting? How do you see this evolving?
I think, firstly, we're at a moment in time where the selection of main contractors and subcontractors, the financial strength of those are absolutely key. Our single biggest risk as developer on a project is our contractor put into administration. So getting a contractor with the correct financial strength is hugely important. And one way Chris, just speaking for him, touched on when we had our webinar, which I totally agree with, the ORG model of having a smaller number of trusted subcontractors that are financially strong, deliver quality and deliver on time. As developer, that's what we want to hear from people like Chris and other contractors. As developer, we're taking a deeper look than we've ever done before. It's not just the main contractor, it's the subcontractors. It's the professional team they're appointing for the delivery. We insist on having a final say on some of that now. So you could argue we're going beyond the remit of a D&B contract, but it's necessary for two reasons. One is, ensuring financial strength, but also getting quality. We've got to deliver a quality product at the end of this, and our investors are demanding, the quality. So I think it's important. But we've also got to, and we touched on it with Chris on our webinar last week, was the danger with just creating small groups. How do you allow new up-and-coming architectural practices, M&E, subcontract, whatever it may be, into our BTR world? So we've got to be careful we don't lock people out. But particularly at Hub, we're strong believers in like a smaller group. That doesn't mean new people can't come in, but trusted advisors, and we can have that collaborative approach. And particularly with contractors, I always say no game playing. We don't play, we have no interest in playing those games. We have a lot of risk to manage, and we have a great building to build, and hopefully our investors are happy with it. But going forward in the future, just come back to the original, I see a more of an alignment between contractor, developer, and funder. you know, and potentially that might mean the forward funding model is going to change and evolve over time. It's going to be a greater emphasis on quality, you know, and not just building 400 homes and finishing them in the 6th of April 2024. There's going to be more to it. You can see that coming in already, and I do think the future will create more alignment of all of the professional team, but the developer, funder, and contractor in particular.
I sort of just probe that a little bit more. We've heard a lot of speak in the conference and generally around build-to-rent bringing additionality. Wonderful concept. What is additionality? But additionality ultimately in deliverable terms is when a developer and a contractor working, I guess, with the design team identifies that it's this rather than that. And it's this for these reasons rather than that because it's cheaper. So the delivery of additionality in build-to-rent, I mean, the acceptance of that proposition, the acceptance of that as an objective, and looking and working backwards to that to say, what is the work required to deliver that additionality? Also, what is the cost? To the earlier point, if we go to Tom and say, listen, mate, it's going to cost this much more, but this is the value coming out of that, and we're clear on that, as you've said yourself and you've said, Tom, investors are willing to do that. So that there's a thread of improved transparency here. There's a thread of improved trust through relationship and putting all the risk on the table, not hiding some of them away. And we've all been there, you know. The risk of value engineering being about valuing everything out, you know. And those stronger alignment between investor, developer, contractor, and indeed the designers, and everybody is doing more in a sense. You're doing more to define the brief. You're looking for opportunity to deliver that brief. And now again, how do we propose additionality? How do we take that to a contractor who's going to have to manage this whole thing and get that work through, and ultimately to the paying customer, you know, they get something that is both a very positive experience, but is a valuable experience to them in terms of their lifestyle. There's some wonderful, threads of innovation within this dynamic, and we sometimes lose that because it's big projects and we get lost in the dust of the building site, if you like. But it's good to take a step back and look at what is happening and see all those positive changes, even with the technology that's there as well. So you've kind of had a sense of what we see as an emerging development dynamic, or delivery dynamic between investor, contractor, and investor. Open to the audience now. Do you have questions? Do you have observations about what you think might work? What could we think about as a group to move things forward? And there's a hand up there. If we could get a mic across to there, please. If you could just say who you are.
Hi, I'm Hannah Durden from CNZW. I think, Damien, I'm going to fire this one at you. I've obviously worked with Hub, and I genuinely believe that you guys have sort of pushed the boundaries of what has been going on in BTR, how it's structured, etc. Do you think there's a place, going back to this, developer-contractor onto operator relationship, for a sort of Rolls-Royce aeroplane engine style model where you retain the contractor for a longer period and they get involved in the maintenance of those buildings?
Yeah, I think that's exactly, Hannah, what I was getting at earlier, was that alignment. You know, the same with the developer. Is there a financial interest beyond delivering these homes to back up what you're saying in terms of rents, quality, etc.? And the same with the contractor. You know, not this obsession in 12 or 24 months they're out, bye-bye, and this small retention held back. So I think there is. I would love to get to that point, but we do need our funding partners to go on that journey as well.
I think the panel we've just had is on maximising NOI, and from our perspective, you want easy maintenance, you need spares, you need someone that's willing to come back and work with you through issues, replace small niggles, snagging that you might not have picked up on PC, and if you have that relationship and there's trust and honesty, you'll use that party again. So.
Anybody else? So as we wrap this up, every session has to come up with at least 3 recommendations for our industry about how we can improve things. So we've had quite a few today. So what are the recommendations or the action points from this group? Who wants to go first? Martina, how about you?
Okay. I would suggest to keep investing in this dynamic, the collaboration between architects and designers, and especially keeping the designers involved from the beginning until the end. I think this is very important, because if we're involved early on, we can coordinate more things, which will have a positive knock-on effect and help to mitigate also risks as well, because you will have less issues later on. So
Thank you. Collaboration. Tom?
I think for us, it goes back to that brief, really work on, which market are you going into, where do you want to set your sort of price point and quality, and having a very clear specification that you can provide, and thinking about technology and how you can be sort of smarter and more efficient, and ultimately services that are going to make your asset more efficient, but also tenants will sort of enjoy that level of service at different price points.
Damien?
I think transparency and an alignment of interest, that whether that's from appointing a design professional, you don't hide the cost plan, show the appraisal, let a consultant come on the journey with you. You're not trying to build a building as cheap as possible. We find that as a great approach with architects, for example. They're on board, they understand why they're doing something to a budget. And it's also with the funder and with the contractor, that I touched on it earlier. And risk management, place it in the right place, don't hide things away, look at the bigger picture. And we hope we're going to work with funders that value that and ultimately pay more for a better quality product.
I mean, I suppose what I would add to that, and I think has already been exemplified by this group, is the willingness, the transparency that's associated with the issue and how that issue is resolved. And if we could do that more and more, not just in the big development spaces, but just more generally on the maintenance of our buildings, on the treatment of our the customers in the buildings and all that sort of, this awareness of nobody wins if there's a problem, I think that as an overarching kind of sentiment coming out of this is a really positive thing. And it's, from my experience of 30 years in the industry and having to go through some tough negotiations with developers and contractors, to hear this type of approach is really heartening. And I commend you for the work that you've done in this regard. I think it's really positive. So ladies and gentlemen, if you could please put your hands together for what's been a terrific panel.